Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Fundraising Today and the Go Beyond Fundraising podcast. Today, I am joined by Albert Vasquez. Albert, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Leah. Thanks for having me.
Tell us a little bit about your role at Rosterify and some of your background working in the tech space for nonprofits.
I am the head of sales and head of overall operations for Rosterify North America. So that includes the United States, that includes Canada. And part of what I do on a day to day basis is work with nonprofits to help them with managing their day to day operations for volunteer management and any of the needs around it.
So, we're sitting down today to talk about volunteers and volunteer management. And I think it's a really relevant topic because there have been various studies over the last couple of years that have shown some shifts happening with the state of volunteer in the United States and around the world. We know that a lot of nonprofits rely heavily on volunteers. Having a way to keep them engaged is really important. So, to kick things off, start with some of the common challenges that organizations tend to face when it comes to managing their volunteers.
Yeah. So I talk to organizations every day, multiple times per day, all day long. And the frequent things I come across are helping volunteers on board, getting them into the pipeline, getting them through the pipeline and a lot of it is manual. So for the volunteer manager, they're having to manually track volunteer by volunteer, what stage in the process they're in. And then it's also on the volunteer side. They're having to do manual things like download a form, sign it, upload it, email it, go through trainings. And part of what we see is it can get a little frustrating for volunteers and volunteer managers because it can take so long to get through the process. Also, I'm also seeing and having conversations around just overall tracking and managing what volunteers are doing when they're coming in, if they're coming in, and being able to validate that. Additionally, we're seeing a lot of corporate volunteering going on, and it causes a lot of frustration with volunteer managers because they get a call from a local corporate office wants to bring 10 people in, they commit to it, they get a dedicated time slot with some job duties, but then the organization doesn't know who's coming. Did they sign all the paperwork? Did they properly train? So at the last minute, people arrive, they don't have what they need, or throughout that process, the volunteer leader at the corporation is calling that coordinator and manager asking how many people did have signed up. We're supposed to have 10. And that goes back and forth. So on top of the responsibilities that volunteer managers have, they're fielding calls like that. And then it goes to reporting because they don't know who's showing up, how many volunteers they have. They're having to capture data from different sources and from Excel spreadsheets. And when they're asked, how many volunteers did we have last year or last quarter? And how many hours? And which corporations are sending volunteers? It can take a day, if not more, to run reports like that. So those are some of the challenges that I'm typically hearing and talking to organizations about daily.
I love that you walked us through the experience on both the nonprofit side and the volunteer side when it comes to volunteering, because that first experience they have volunteering with an organization is the biggest indicator of whether or not they're going to volunteer again. And we know when it comes to acquiring a donor, it can be incredibly expensive to acquire a first time donor. And someone who volunteers your organization and has a really great experience is one of the most likely indicators that they're also going to later become a donor to the organization. And so making sure that experience is optimal for that volunteer, especially for that first time volunteering appointment, is just incredibly vital.
Yeah, and you bring up a great point there. That's another topic that comes up is who's a donor, who's a volunteer, are there any similarities or common themes between the two? And how do we turn that into more donations? I get that question every single day.
What's the advice you typically give in that case?
Make sure that whatever you're doing with volunteering is communicating with your fundraising tool or your CRM, and make sure that you have a way to capture and analyze that data. There's several tools out there that help with that type of analytics or that type of need.
You bring up a great point about systems talking to each other. We know that a person is more than a volunteer. They're more than a donor. They have a whole host of interactions with your nonprofit, with your organization through lots of different channels. There's this idea out there called the loyalty loop or the donor vortex, but they're all ways of visualizing this very complex and multi-channel, omni-channel relationship that a person can have with your organization. And volunteering is one of those channels, but other channels are how they're interacting with your website, how they're interacting with your social media content, how they are interacting with any direct mail that you're sending them. And so ensuring that all of your backend systems are talking to each other is something that is just an absolutely crucial component to have in today's just omni-channel digital and physical world.
Yeah, you're absolutely right there. As we progress conversations with a lot of organizations, they realize there are lots of tools that can measure different things that are not tied to volunteering, but tied to interactions and engagement. Like you said, on the websites. Was at a conference recently where I found a couple of partners that do that, and being able to partner and help organizations just by me being educated, it helps everybody else just through conversations, just through knowledge.
Absolutely. So, an interesting fun fact that I learned about Rosterify is that you are the volunteer management CRM for the Super Bowl, which just happened. It was the most watched Super Bowl in all time. They think they said it had more views since the moon landing in 1969. So I didn't know that the Super Bowl relied on so many volunteers to make that whole incredible show run. So can you tell me a little bit more about that and just some of the complexities of managing volunteers for a huge event like that?
Yeah, it's a coveted role. And in terms of volunteering for the Super Bowl, it starts with people greeting visitors. The host cities of the Super Bowl take a lot of pride in having the Super Bowl and it being hosted there. So you see volunteer greeters at the airports, at the hotels, outside, around the venue, helping out within the stadium. But then also the days leading up to the Super Bowl requires setting up and just helping and assisting, and then post is cleanup. So a lot of people think it's the Super Bowl the day of, the hours of, but it's leading up to and it's post. We'll be doing the FIFA World Cup games when they're here in the States in 2026 as well, just as elaborate.
So when it comes to like recruiting these volunteers, I'd love to know a little bit more about how Rosterify helps with that, but also just about like that for a large event like that, what that whole process looks like.
Yeah. So it starts recruiting is the for the Super Bowl is not really that difficult, right? Because people want to do it. But in a lot of cases it's volume and it's roles where, people don't really they're not their first choice, but the technology allows people to to find the opportunities and go through the process quickly, giving them the opportunity to find these roles that they're interested in. And it doesn't need a lot of human interaction if you don't want it to. So these volunteers get through the sign up process, get through onboarding, and they can quickly select. And that's part of one of the things that we see in society is we want instant gratification and we want it now and we want it fast. And that's what we're able to provide these large events. But then being able to have that database of volunteers in the system, the Super Bowl host committees, they a lot of times need to communicate with those volunteers, and they do that through the platform. So being able to get them in, keep them communicated with and engaged, is really what drives this whole need for the platform within the Super Bowl.
Yeah, it's when you think about it in a different way, I don't think there's anything quite like vetting that many volunteers. It's in a lot of ways, it's like going through a hiring process because you need to know a little bit about these people. You may need to do some kind of preliminary sort of background check just to make sure that they're not going to be a danger to all these, celebrities and different people and just the huge volumes of people that show up for these kinds of events. And then of course you have to offboard them well and make sure that they have a great experience there too. And you just having the ability to like vet so many people in one go I can imagine it's a daunting task for those people that are performing that task.
Yeah, and that's what's made it easy for Roster5 to go year over year with the Super Bowl host committees because they know it's easy, they know it's fast, they know it's technology based. And yeah, for the background checks, we can even streamline that process if they're interacting with the youth or with anybody else that you should probably screen them ahead of time. But then the beauty of having that relationship with the Super Bowl is that city leaves behind 2,000, 3,000 volunteers, if not more, that are willing to volunteer. So a lot of times the city picks up that group of volunteers and they use them for other events. So a great example is the Grand Prix, the F1 Grand Prix that was in Las Vegas recently. They were already on Rostrify, so they had the volunteers needed to run that. In Houston, when the Super Bowl was there many years ago, they kept the database and they use it for other opportunities that come through the city because they have the volunteers, they've been vetted, they keep them engaged through communications and the platform, which makes it easy to sustain a program like that and then give back to the community.
That's awesome. So getting back to the topic of fundraising a little bit, what are some of the qualities of a volunteer that Rosterify might flag them as being a good potential donor?
So some of the qualities could be just the number of hours, the number of events, what they do for a living, and then where they work. So those are some of the things that you can capture when you're going through the registration process. And then using the data of employers for your volunteers, you can run reports to say, I might have 50 volunteers from a neighboring bank or a neighboring major organization, major corporation, and I can go back to them and talk about their corporate responsibility program that they have in place. And they likely want to donate. They likely want to maybe issue grants or whatever the case may be, but you can come to them proactively, showing them what their people are doing in the community and kind of help tie that to additional fundraising opportunities. I've seen that executed very well with a lot of organizations that I've dealt with.
That's really interesting. So let's get a little bit more deeply into Rosterify. Can you give our listeners and viewers a brief overview of all the different features that Rosterify has, how it addresses some of the challenge, and we've already addressed how it addresses. We were already talked a little bit about how it addresses some of the challenges we've discussed around volunteer management and donor prospecting. But I'd love to just get the full picture of the tool and kind of what sets it apart from other volunteer management
Absolutely.
CRMs.
So Rosterify it's the only end-to-end solution out there that lets you recruit volunteers, onboard, train, engage, retain, and provide reporting. So I'll go through some of these key features and really what sets us apart. So when it comes to onboarding, where we are really unique is a lot of organizations have different roles that have different onboarding journeys or steps. So for example, you might have a driver that needs to submit a driver's license and proof of insurance and sign a waiver, when everybody else that's just packing meals or working in the warehouse just needs to sign a form and get to work. A lot of platforms can't accommodate both of those, which Rostrify can. And that's very much a strength of ours. Additionally, automating the entire onboarding process. So you can automate document signatures. You can automate training assignments and completions, and you can automate the scheduling of interviews to speed up that process. But then when it comes to the volunteer and them showing up and them going to actually perform their duties, we have a mobile app, which it sets us apart. We provide the ability to do self check-ins via the mobile app, setting a radius around the location. So to prevent people from checking in at home, they check in within a certain small radius. On top of that, just providing other ways for volunteers that may not be tech savvy to volunteer. So we provide a QR code that a lot of times gets placed on the back of a volunteer badge. They scan their badge to check in. That's a feature that a lot of organizations like because their volunteer base is not tech savvy, maybe a little older and not quickly to adapt to technology. So we're very accommodating with that. And then moving into like the reporting side, we're so configurable as a solution. The platform looks like it was custom built for our customers because of the branding, the colors, the fields that can change. And because of all that, we open up every field to be reported against. So it's easier to run reports. If there's a field, you can run a report against it. And our customers love that feature about us in terms of reporting. That's like we talked about earlier. Reporting is one of the most difficult pieces of their job.
Are there any features in Rosterify that are templated features or things for an organization that they're maybe new to managing volunteers or they've newly launched a volunteer program and they're not really sure exactly which steps and which kinds of documents and what onboarding things they need to have in place? Are there like templated journeys that exist in Rosterify to help them get off the ground?
Yes, there are. One of the things we built recently was a templated system that's tailored to the type of organization. So whether it's like a food bank or a cause and cure or something that's youth based, we have template designs that have a basic journey that we typically see in the space. So they get off to a quick start with it and they just make adjustments and modifications and make it work for them. But yeah, that's a great point. And we realize that and are trying to help the communities with that type of those types of templates. Additionally, one thing to add that and that I failed to mention earlier about our one of our uniqueness is we can take on an integration side. So we have an open API that lets our system talk to CRMs, background check providers, learning management systems, Zoom info, and Teams meeting links. And when we implement these solutions with our organizations, they realize, okay, there's a lot that our platform is able to do, and they usually take it in phases. But knowing that we can help them scale for the future is really why it's really why people select Rostrify because they can see us working now, next year, 5 years from now, and 10 years after that.
So you just returned from the Rosterify HQ in Australia for your kickoff call for your kickoff meeting for the year. Are there some new features or abilities that we'll be seeing from Rosterify in the near future?
Yeah, so we got the mobile app that just rolled out this year. So part of that was having that discussion. Features are rolling out with Rosterify every 3 weeks. So we do 3 week sprints. We take feedback from our customers and directly from the platform so they can vote on what they want to do. But on what they can vote on what features they want seen in the system or enhanced. But one of the things that's coming out later on in the year is an enhancement to manage group and corporate volunteering a lot better. We're doing an enhanced integration with the Blackbaud CRM platform, other CRMs as well. And then we are also updating the way we provide dashboards and reports on the Rostrify admin portal. And we've taken this feedback from voting and from talking to our existing base.
Very cool. Albert, it was great to sit down and talk with you today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on the show. It was great. It was great chatting with you and being able to share about what I'm seeing and volunteering and on the volunteering side and sharing a little bit about Rostrify.